The day my father died, I held a secret worth $20 million. But what my stepmother revealed just a week later almost broke me. Almost. I was once Martin Miller, a boy who thought he knew his family, his father, and the story of our past. I was wrong. I knew nothing at all. My life, my world, it started in what felt like paradise, a perfect picture of love and prosperity in Maryland. My father, Frederick Miller, was a force of nature, a renowned businessman in real estate and horse racing, with vast lands and a prestigious track where his thoroughbreds galloped under the spotlight. My mother, Grace, she was the heart of our home. Gentle, warm, always laughing, playing soft melodies on the piano every evening. And Ivy, my little sister, 3 years my junior, with golden hair and sparkling eyes, always begging me to play hide-and-seek in the sprawling gardens. Our mansion, perched on a gentle hill, surrounded by ancient oak trees and the rose bushes my mother planted with her own hands, it felt like paradise. The living room, bathed in light, overlooked lush green meadows. Weekends were spent on picnics by the lake or gathered by the fireplace, listening to my father's bold stories. He was strong, energetic, but his gaze towards my mother, Ivy, and me was always so tender. I can still see him, hoisting Ivy onto his shoulders, pretending to be a horse, my mother giggling nearby. I truly believe life would stay that way forever. I was a carefree 12-year-old, dreaming of the day I'd join my father, building on the empire he'd created. But then, one fateful day changed everything. It was an early May morning. My father had flown to Kentucky for the Derby, a place where billion-dollar deals were made. Before he left, he kissed Ivy and me, promising a small medal, then ruffled my hair. "Take care of the house, Martin." I nodded, brimming with pride. That night, I stayed up reading. My mother and Ivy were long asleep. Around midnight, a strange noise, like breaking glass, drifted from downstairs. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a cat. But then a sharp, acrid smell, smoke, crept into my room, making me cough. I bolted out, screaming, "Mom! Ivy!" My voice faltered in the thick, suffocating air. The hallway was a swirling nightmare of smoke. I heard my mother's panicked voice. "Martin, get Ivy! Get out!" I ran to Ivy's room, pulling her, half asleep, from her bed. She mumbled, "What's going on?" I didn't answer. I just grabbed her hand and dragged her towards the stairs. When we reached the living room, the flames were a roaring monster. Silk curtains, my mother's favorite, were ablaze. Black smoke swirled. Panic gripped me, but I kept pulling Ivy towards the front door. "Where's Mom?" Ivy cried, yanking my hand. I turned back and saw my mother trying to reach us. Then, a deafening crack. A massive wooden beam from the ceiling crashed down right before my eyes, pinning them both, silencing their screams. I stood frozen. "Mom! Ivy!" I screamed, lunging towards the debris, but the flames licked closer, scorching my skin. The smoke choked me. My eyes stung, blurring everything. I heard the distant wail of sirens, but it was too late. A firefighter dragged me out, my screams for them tearing my throat. When I came to on a stretcher, the mansion was a smoldering ruin. My mother and Ivy never made it out. In the days that followed, I was a ghost. My father returned, gaunt, hollow-eyed. He hugged me tightly, but said little. I knew he blamed himself. "If I had been home that night," he muttered once. But I blamed myself too. I was the older brother. I was supposed to protect Ivy, to save my mother. I was powerless, forced to watch that beam collapse and take the two people I loved most. After the fire, my father and I moved to a smaller house, but the atmosphere was always heavy. He buried himself in work, rarely home, saying it was the only way to stop thinking about them. But I knew he was just avoiding the pain. I grew up in loneliness, no longer the carefree boy. I became quiet, burdened by guilt. Every night, the image of the flames, my mother's screams, haunted my dreams. I'd wake in a cold sweat. I tried to stay close to my father, but the distance between us grew. He became withdrawn, focused solely on business. I started helping at his company, sorting papers, running errands, hoping to be his support. He barely noticed. Once, I overheard him on the phone. "Martin's too much like Grace. Seeing him just breaks my heart." I didn't blame him, but I was hurting too. I lost my mother, my sister, and now it felt like I was losing my father. 3 years after the fire, I turned 15. Life for us was a gray painting. The new house, smaller, colder, swallowed me in emptiness. My father, once vibrant, was a shadow, absent, consumed by work, escaping his pain. I was no better. At school, I was withdrawn, friendless. Nightmares still jolted me awake. I tried to please my father at his company, but he rarely looked at me with pride. He'd sigh, as if my presence reminded him of our losses. Then, a woman appeared, Camilla West. She was like a strange breeze. I met her in my father's office. She stood by his desk, in a fitted green dress, blonde hair pinned up, a radiant smile that felt strangely familiar. "Hello, Martin," she said, her voice sweet. I nodded awkwardly. My father, beside her, wore a rare smile I hadn't seen in years. "This is Camilla, my new secretary." I saw a spark of life in his eyes I thought was gone forever. Camilla was nothing like my mother. My mother radiated a gentle warmth. Camilla was undeniably beautiful, but her beauty was sharp, unsettling. Her eyes were keen, assessing everything. Her dazzling smile lacked the sincerity of my mother's. I couldn't explain it, but every time she looked at me, I felt scrutinized like a foreign object. In the weeks that followed, Camilla became a constant. She brought small gifts, cookies, flowers, wine for my father. He began to change. He stayed home more, laughed more, sometimes even hummed. Part of me was glad to see him alive again, but another part felt threatened. Camilla was claiming a space I felt belonged only to my mother. Less than a year later, he announced they were getting married. He called me into his study. I was a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Martin, what do you think about starting over? Camilla's a good person. She brings me joy, and I think she could bring joy to our family." I didn't know what to say. I wanted him to be happy, but deep down, I felt betrayed. My mother and Ivy had only just left us. How could he replace them so easily? The wedding was lavish. Laughter, music, celebration. I stood quietly, clutching orange juice, watching my father hold Camilla's hand. She wore a stunning white dress, her smile radiant. But when her eyes briefly met mine, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't a stepmother's welcome. It was the look of someone marking their territory. After the wedding, Camilla moved in. She quickly made the house her own. My mother's paintings were replaced with abstract art. Her beloved rose bushes uprooted, replaced by Camilla's expensive ornamental plants. Each change felt like a knife to my heart. The house was no longer a home. It became Camilla's domain. Camilla soon became pregnant. Stella was born, then Oliver 2 years later. My father seemed to find joy again. He'd cradle Stella, sing lullabies, play with Oliver in the new garden. I watched him happy and hurt, glad he'd found light, but pained that it no longer included me. I felt like an outsider, a faint shadow. Camilla never treated me poorly, but she maintained a polite distance, as if I were an uninvited guest. Our conversations were superficial. "How's school?" or "Have you eaten dinner?" I started noticing strange things. Once, I overheard her on the phone, voice low and secretive. "No, he doesn't know anything. Don't worry, everything's still on track." She hung up quickly when she saw me, smiling as if nothing had happened, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Another time, she flinched when I opened the door to my father's study. I didn't tell my father, not wanting to upset him, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Camilla was hiding a secret, and I feared it would destroy everything. As time passed, I tried to adapt. I focused on school, on making my father proud. I still helped at his company. But every time I saw him with Stella and Oliver, a void grew in my heart. I missed the days he'd hoist Ivy onto his shoulders. I missed my mother's piano melodies. Those were just memories, overshadowed by Camilla and her children. I wondered if I truly belonged anymore. My father found new happiness, but it didn't include me. Camilla, with her perfect smile and sharp eyes, was slowly taking everything. The house, my father, even my future. I didn't know what she was hiding, but my instinct screamed that she wasn't who she seemed. Another storm was coming, and this time, I wasn't sure I had the strength to face it. I started keeping a small notebook hidden under my bed, recording odd details about Camila. Secret phone calls, startled reactions, furtive glances. I didn't know where it would lead, but I felt compelled to do something. I couldn't let my family, or what was left of it, fall into the hands of someone I didn't trust. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming. 16 years after that fateful fire, I was 28, a grown man, with an MBA from Columbia Business School. Years away from home, I'd built a stronger version of myself, no longer the helpless boy who watched flames take his mother and sister. I learned to control my emotions, to analyze, to confront. But deep down, the scar still smoldered. Every time I thought of my father or the house that was once my paradise, my heart ached. I decided to return to Maryland, not just to reunite with my father, but to contribute to the business empire he'd built. I imagined walking into his office, seeing him strong and commanding, ready to pass down invaluable lessons. But reality was far harsher. When I stepped back into Maryland, the first thing that struck me was the listless atmosphere of Miller Enterprises. The main office, once a vibrant hub, was eerily quiet. Employees moved sluggishly, their eyes lacking passion. I overheard whispers about the coastal resort project, my father's pride, being stalled due to lack of funds. The press had already published sensational headlines. Miller Empire loses its shine. Frederick Miller faces bankruptcy risk. I read those articles on my flight home, each word a dagger. When I entered my father's office, I hoped for his familiar smile. Instead, I found a tired man, his hair streaked with gray, hunched over a desk buried in papers. He looked up, and for a moment, his eyes lit up. "Martin, you're back," he said, his voice frail. He hugged me, but the embrace lacked the strength of years past. I felt a frailty, as if he hid an immense burden. "Dad, what's going on?" I asked, unable to hide my worry. He shook his head, offering a faint smile. "Just a rough patch, son. The company will pull through." But I knew he was hiding something. His eyes avoided mine, his hands trembled slightly as he held his coffee mug. Returning to the new mansion, now Camila's domain, I felt like a stranger. It was grand, pristine, but lacked warmth. Stella, 12, was pretty but haughty, clinging to her mother, eyeing me warily. Oliver, 10, mischievous and loud, rarely spoke to me. Camila greeted me with her usual perfect smile, but I sensed the falseness. "Martin, welcome home," she said, but the word felt alien. In the days that followed, I realized this wasn't a family. Tensions between my father and Camila erupted frequently, though they tried to hide it. I overheard their arguments at night. "Frederick, you can't keep going like this," Camila snapped. "What more do you want, Camila?" "I've done everything you asked," my father retorted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I stood outside their door, my heart pounding, wanting to demand answers. But every time, I'd find my father alone in his study, a bottle of whiskey on the desk, his eyes vacant. Once, he looked at me as if he wanted to say something, then shook his head and turned away. I started watching Camila closely again. The suspicions from my teenage years resurfaced, stronger than ever. She still took secretive phone calls, often late at night. One night, I saw her on the balcony, whispering into her phone. He's starting to suspect. "I need more time." She hung up quickly when she heard my footsteps. I pretended not to notice, but I knew she was hiding something significant. Then I noticed Anthony Blake, my father's right-hand man. Tall, handsome, charming, always by my father's side. But I sensed an unusual connection between him and Camila. Furtive glances, subtle, meaningful touches that seemed anything but innocent. Once, I caught them standing too close in my father's office when he wasn't there. Camila laughed loudly, placing a hand on Anthony's shoulder, and he responded with a knowing look. I stood frozen outside the door, my blood boiling. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. I revisited the small notebook hidden under my bed from years ago. The scribbled notes about Camila, her secret calls, her startled reactions, her sneaky glances, they now felt like crucial clues. I added new observations. The unusual closeness between Camila and Anthony, her arguments with my father, the company's decline. I didn't know where this was leading, but I felt I was on the edge of a dark secret that could destroy everything my father had built. I tried talking to my father, but he always deflected. One evening, finding him alone in his study, the whiskey bottle half empty, I confronted him. Dad, I know something's wrong. The company, Camila, all of this. What are you hiding from me? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, eyes filled with pain, as if wrestling with whether to tell the truth. Then he sighed, stood, and placed a hand on my shoulder. Martin, just focus on doing your job. Don't worry about me. Everything will be fine. But I knew he was lying. He was hiding a burden he didn't want me to carry. In the days that followed, I quietly dug deeper into the company's affairs. I secretly reviewed financial reports and emails on my father's computer. The numbers were staggering. The company was drowning in millions of dollars of debt. Major projects were stalled, partners pulling out. I couldn't fathom how his empire, once a symbol of success, had crumbled so far. But what chilled me to the core was a hidden folder my father had saved. It contained emails between Anthony Blake and anonymous partners discussing offshore money transfers. Was Anthony hiding something from my father? And Camila? Was she behind it all? I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. One thing was clear. My father was suffering, and I couldn't stand by and watch him fall. I began planning to monitor Camila and Anthony more closely, noting every detail, every overheard conversation. I owed it to my father, my mother, Ivy, and myself to find the truth. Each night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the darkness envelop me. I thought of my mother's gentle smile, Ivy's golden hair. I thought of my father, once my rock, now drowning in pain and secrets. And I thought of Camila, her perfect smile hiding a secret I couldn't yet reach. I knew I was stepping into a battle, but I had no choice. I had to protect what was left of my family, no matter the cost. I tried my best to get close to my father, hoping he'd open up. I visited his office, sat beside him, asked about the company, about the plans he used to share so enthusiastically. But he only responded with short answers, his eyes fixed on the pile of papers in front of him. Martin, focus on your own future, he said, his voice low and weary. Don't worry about these things. But I couldn't help but worry. I saw him growing increasingly haggard. His once broad shoulders hunched as if carrying a burden that couldn't be shared. I wanted to confront Camila, but I didn't have enough evidence yet. Confronting her now would only make everything worse. I needed to be patient, to wait for her to slip up. But time wasn't on my side. The company spiraled downward, the press relentlessly reporting on debts and failed projects. I saw him drinking more, staying up all night, sitting in the darkness with empty eyes. Then one morning, my world collapsed once again. I was in the office, reviewing financial reports I'd secretly taken from his computer when the phone rang. It was an employee's voice, trembling, panicked. Martin, you have to come right away. Mr. Frederick, She didn't finish, but her choked voice was enough to make my heart clench. I rushed out, sped towards the company's headquarters. When I arrived, police cars and ambulances swarmed the building. A crowd of employees whispered, eyes filled with fear. I pushed through and saw my father lying motionless on the office floor. A police officer was taking notes. A paramedic shook his head. Suicide, I heard someone say coldly. He took too many sleeping pills. I stood frozen, unable to believe it. My father, a symbol of strength, couldn't have done this. He couldn't leave me like this. I knelt beside him, grasping his cold hand. Dad, please don't, I whispered, tears streaming. He didn't respond. His eyes, now tightly closed, held no light. The entire world crumbled beneath my feet. I had lost my mother, lost Ivy, and now I had lost my father. The last person I thought would always be by my side. News of his death spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, prominent businessman Frederick Miller commits suicide. The Miller empire collapses. Those headlines cut into my heart like knives. They wrote about him as if he were just a number, a symbol of failure, without mentioning the man who had loved his family, who had sacrificed everything to build a legacy. I read those articles, my hands shaking with anger and pain, but I could do nothing. My father's funeral was cold. I stood by the coffin, looking at his face strangely serene. Camila stood a few steps away in an elegant black dress, her face devoid of emotion. Stella and Oliver beside her, silent, but I saw no tears. I wanted to scream, to ask Camila why she was so composed, but I held back. I didn't want to cause a scene. His friends and business partners attended, but I sensed distance in their eyes. They looked at me with pity, but no one stayed long. I stood there alone, feeling as if the entire world had turned its back on me. As his coffin was lowered, I clenched my fists, trying not to break down. I silently promised him, "I'll find out the truth, Dad. I won't let it end like this." In the days that followed, I lived like a shadow. Every morning, I felt empty, as if a part of my soul had left with him. I couldn't stop thinking about him, the words he never had the chance to say, the secrets he took to his grave. I looked at my small notebook, now filled with notes about Camila and Anthony, but I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless, like the 12-year-old boy watching the flames take my mother and sister. Then one morning, I received a call from Henry Marshall, my father's private lawyer. "Martin, you need to come to my office immediately. There are some important matters regarding your father's will." His voice was calm, but I sensed the gravity. I hurried to his office. Camila, Stella, and Oliver were already there, seated around the conference table, unreadable expressions. Camila maintained her perfect smile, but I noticed the tension in her eyes. Stella fiddled with her phone. Oliver yawned. Henry Marshall, an older man with silver hair and thick glasses, began reading the will. His voice was steady, but each word felt like a hammer blow. All of my father's assets, the mansion, the luxury cars, the company shares, the horse racing track, were transferred to Camila and her two children, Stella and Oliver. My name wasn't mentioned, not once, except for a single line at the end. To my son, Martin Miller, I leave a wooden box containing family keepsakes. When Henry finished, Camila flashed a triumphant smile. She looked at me, her eyes cold. "Martin, I hope you'll be okay. Your father left the best for his family." Stella giggled, and Oliver smirked as if I were some pathetic loser. I clenched my fists, suppressing the rage. I wanted to scream, to demand justice, but it was pointless. I stood up, took the wooden box from Henry, and left without a word. When I got home, I opened the wooden box. Inside were a few old family photos, my mother, Ivy, my father, and me from happier times. I looked at my mother's gentle smile, Ivy's shining golden hair. Tears welled up, unstoppable. I held the photos, clinging to lost memories. But at the same time, fury surged. Why did my father do this? Why did he abandon me, leaving everything to Camila and her two children, who I knew didn't love him the way I did? The ordeal didn't end there. Exactly one day after the will was read, after visiting my father's grave, I returned to the mansion. What I saw made my blood boil. Camila was sitting there, hand in hand with Anthony Blake, my father's trusted right-hand man. They no longer bothered to hide. Camila laughed loudly, her eyes gleaming with triumph, while Anthony looked at me with a smug grin. Camila stood, walking towards me, her high heels clicking on the wooden floor. "Martin," she said, her voice sweet but sharp as a blade, "I think it's time for you to leave. This house, everything in it, now belongs to me and my children. Your father's will was clear, wasn't it?" She tilted her head, her smile cutting into me. "You no longer have a place here." I stood frozen, feeling the world collapse. "This is my father's house," I growled, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "My family's house. You have no right." Camila smirked, her eyes flashing with cruelty. "Family? What family are you talking about, Martin? Your father chose us, me, Stella, and Oliver. Now, pack your things and go before I have to call someone to escort you out." Anthony stepped forward, placing a hand on Camila's shoulder, asserting his claim. "You heard her, Martin," he said, his voice low but menacing. "Don't make this worse." I looked at them, Camila with her venomous smile, Anthony with his blatant arrogance. In that moment, I want to charge at them, to knock them down, to take back everything that belonged to my father, my mother, and Ivy. But I knew I couldn't. Not now. Not when all I had was an old wooden box and a few family photos. I turned away and walked upstairs, each step heavy. I opened my closet, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing my clothes, books, the few belongings I had left. The wooden box I held tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. As I dragged the suitcase down the stairs, Camila and Anthony were still there, laughing and talking as if I didn't exist. I overheard Camila whispering to Anthony, "Now everything is ours, my love. No one stands in our way anymore." Her words were a final dagger. I paused, looking at them one last time, my eyes burning with hatred. "You'll pay for this," I said, my voice low but sharp. Camila merely scoffed, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Get out, Martin. Don't ruin my mood." I walked out of the house, dragging my suitcase along the gravel path. The cold wind blew, carrying dried leaves, bidding farewell to the place that was once my home. I turned back to look at the mansion, now an empty shell seized by a woman whose malicious nature had been fully revealed. I gripped the wooden box, feeling its weight, and vowed to myself, "Dad, I won't let them win. I'll make them pay for betraying you." In the days that followed, I lived like a purposeless wanderer. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Maryland, a place barely big enough for a bed, an old wooden table, and the memories that relentlessly haunted me. Every night, I opened the wooden box, gazing at the photos of my mother, Ivy, and my father from happier times. Those photos were my only source of strength, but also a painful reminder of everything I had lost. I couldn't stop thinking about Camila, her triumphant smile, and Anthony Blake mocking me. Camila's words echoed, "Everything is ours now." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, vowing that I wouldn't let them revel in their victory for long. An opportunity came quickly, about a week after I was kicked out. I received a call from Henry Marshall, the lawyer. His voice was as calm as during the will reading, but I sensed urgency. "Martin, you need to come to my office immediately. There are important matters I need to discuss with you privately." My heart raced. Henry was the person my father trusted most. If he wanted to meet me alone, it couldn't be trivial. I arrived at Henry's office on a rainy afternoon. The office was just as I remembered, packed with documents, the faint smell of old paper. Henry sat behind his desk, his thick glasses slipping down his nose, his expression serious but tinged with concern. In front of him was a large, brown envelope and a neatly stamped stack of documents. "Sit down, Martin," he said, his voice low. I sat, feeling the air in the room grow heavier. Henry pushed the envelope towards me. "This is what your father left for you. Not the wooden box you received during the will reading. This is something he wanted me to give you personally when the time was right." I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a thick stack of documents. The title, "Irrevocable Trust, Martin Miller," printed clearly on the first page. I skimmed through the numbers and legal terms, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the figure, $20 million. I looked up at Henry, unable to believe my eyes. What is this?" I asked, my voice faltering. Henry sighed, pushing his glasses up. "This is a trust fund your father set up years ago, Martin. He established it long before to ensure you had a safety net no matter what happened. He knew life isn't always fair, and he wanted you to be secure." He paused, studying me, then handed me another, smaller, carefully sealed envelope. "And this is your father's final letter. He asked me to give it to you only when you were ready." I took the letter, feeling its weight. The red wax seal with my father's initial, F, made my throat tighten. I wanted to open it immediately, but I was afraid its contents would bring more pain. Henry placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice softer. "Read it, Martin. Your father wanted you to know the truth." Back in my rented apartment, I sat on the creaky bed, the dim yellow light casting shadows on the letter. I took a deep breath, broke the seal, and began to read. My father's words, in black ink, trembled as if penned in turmoil. "Martin, my beloved son, if you're reading this, I'm likely no longer here to speak to you directly. I'm sorry for leaving you to face everything alone. I tried, but there are mistakes I couldn't fix and burdens I couldn't share. This trust fund was something I prepared years ago, after that horrific fire. I knew life is full of risks, and I wanted you to have a path forward no matter what happened. That money is yours, Martin. No one can touch it, not even Camila. I must confess a painful truth. I discovered that Camila is not the person I thought she was. She's been unfaithful with Anthony Blake. And Stella and Oliver, they are not my children. I've known this for a long time, but I lacked the courage to confront it. I was afraid that exposing it would destroy everything I'd built, and you would see me as a failed father. The company has been spiraling, Martin. Mounting debts, failed projects, and betrayals from those I trusted have left me hopeless. I didn't have the strength to go on. But you're different, Martin. You're stronger than I ever was, and I believe you'll find a way to protect our family's legacy. Please forgive me for my weaknesses. Live well, my son. I love you always. Your father, Frederick Miller. I finished reading, tears streaming down my cheeks, soaking the paper. I was devastated and shocked, but at the same time, a major piece of the chaotic puzzle of my life fell into place. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had known everything about Camila, about Anthony, about their betrayal. He had quietly prepared a path for me, even when he couldn't save himself. I clutched the letter to my chest, feeling as though I were holding my father. And for the first time since his death, I felt a spark of hope. But alongside that hope, a fiercer rage than ever before surged within me. Camila and Anthony hadn't just betrayed my father. They had used him, stolen everything he built, and now they were laughing over my pain. I thought of Stella and Oliver, the children I had once tried to love as siblings, but now I knew they didn't carry my father's blood. I didn't blame them. They were just innocent kids caught in their mother's cruel game. But Camila and Anthony, they would pay. I opened the trust fund documents, reading every line carefully. Henry was right. The money was protected by airtight legal clauses, untouchable even by Camila. This was my father's final gift, the weapon he left me to fight with. I thought about the notes in my little notebook, the secret phone calls, the furtive glances, and now, with my father's letter, I had a crucial piece of the puzzle. Confirmation that Camila and Anthony had manipulated everything. Sitting in my small apartment, the yellow light illuminating the letter and documents, I felt a new strength rising within me. My father hadn't given up on me, and I wouldn't give up on him. I would use this trust fund not only to rebuild my life, but to expose the truth and seek justice for my father, my mother, and Ivy. I opened my notebook and added a new line, Camila and Anthony, adultery betrayed Dad. Stella and Oliver are not his children. I underlined it, carving the vow into my mind. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Camila and Anthony held all of my father's assets, the mansion, the luxury cars, the company shares. They thought they had won, that I was just a defeated outcast. But they didn't know I held something they could never anticipate, the truth, and $20 million to turn that truth into justice. I stood up and looked out the window where the city lights glimmered through the night's mist. I thought of my father, of the nights he sat alone with a bottle of whiskey, carrying secrets he couldn't share. I'll do it, Dad, I whispered. I'll make them pay. I began following the news about my father's company. The press relentlessly reported on the collapse of Miller Enterprises. Sensational headlines like "The Miller Empire Teeters" or "Frederick Miller, from pinnacle to abyss," dominated the newspapers. But I noticed that no one mentioned Camila or Anthony. They were still lurking in the shadows, enjoying the vast fortune they had stolen from my father. I wondered what they were doing with those assets, the mansion, the luxury cars, the company shares, the horse racing track. I knew Camila wasn't the type to simply enjoy her spoils. She had a plan, and I was determined to uncover it. One morning, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through articles on my laptop, my phone rang. It was Henry. His voice was more urgent than usual. "Martin, you need to know this. The court has just announced the opening of probate proceedings for your father's estate. All the assets, the mansion, the cars, the company shares, are being frozen to settle Miller Enterprises debts." I sat up straight, my heart pounding. "Frozen? What does that mean?" I asked, though I already had a vague idea. Henry explained. The company owed tens of millions of dollars, from bank loans to money owed to partners. After my father's death, the creditors had collectively demanded repayment, and the court had no choice but to intervene. Camila and her children can't touch the assets until the process is complete, Henry said. And given the current situation, there's a good chance they'll lose almost everything. A surge of electricity coursed through me. This was the opportunity one had been waiting for. Not one I created, but one born from Camila's own greed and carelessness. I turned on the TV, and immediately news about Miller Enterprises flooded the channels. A reporter stood in front of the company's headquarters, her voice dramatic. The Miller Empire, once a symbol of success, now stands on the brink of bankruptcy. The court has ordered all of Frederick Miller's assets frozen to settle debts, halting the family's inheritance. I saw footage of my father's mansion on the screen, with police cars parked at the gate. The press was making a spectacle of it, and I knew Camila could no longer maintain her composed facade. I decided to return to the area near the mansion, not to confront anyone, but to observe. I parked my car in a discreet corner where I could see the main gate. A few hours later, I saw Camila storm out of the mansion, her face flushed, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was frantic. "How did this happen? You said everything was taken care of." I couldn't hear the other side, but I guessed it was Anthony. She paced back and forth, her high heels clicking sharply on the pavement, her blonde hair disheveled. No trace left of the arrogant woman who had kicked me out. Anthony appeared shortly after, driving a sleek sports car, likely one of my father's. He stopped, stepped out, and I watched them argue heatedly. "We have to sell everything before the court takes it," Camila shouted, her voice nearly breaking. Anthony grabbed her shoulders, trying to calm her, but his eyes were filled with tension. "Relax, Camila. We'll figure it out. I have contacts overseas who can help us move the money." I sat in my car, my heart racing, trying to memorize every word. They were planning to liquidate the assets, probably to flee before the creditors and the court tightened their grip. I pulled out my phone and recorded their conversation from a distance. The audio quality was poor, but I knew I needed more evidence. The scene before me filled me with both rage and satisfaction. Camila, who had mocked me and thought she held all the cards, was now panicking like a cornered animal. I wanted to step out and confront her, but I restrained myself. This wasn't the time. I needed to be patient, as my father had taught me. In the days that followed, the press continued its frenzy. Headlines grew harsher. Miller Empire collapses. Inheritance frozen. Camila West faces total loss. I read each article, feeling a portion of the burden in my heart lift. Camila and Anthony were no longer invincible. They were falling into the very trap they had set. I thought of my father, of the nights he sat alone, tormented by debts and betrayal. If he were still alive, how much pain would he feel seeing the woman he once loved turn her back on him, exploiting him to build her own dreams? I decided to contact Henry again to learn more about the probate process. He invited me to his office, and this time his calm voice was more open. "Martin, I understand your pain, but there's something you need to know clearly," Henry said slowly. "The trust fund your father set up for you is completely separate. From the day it was established, the $20 million in it no longer belonged to your father. It belongs to the trust. That means his creditors can't touch it. Whether the company goes bankrupt or your father passes away, the assets in the trust remain protected for you. Your father thought ahead and safeguarded you this way." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. But I didn't just want safety. I wanted justice. "Do you know anything about Camila's plans?" I asked. Henry sighed, his eyes heavy. "I don't have concrete evidence, but I've heard whispers within the company. Camila and Anthony were involved in moving money overseas, likely to hide it before the company collapsed. Your father suspected it, but he didn't act on it." I clenched my fists, feeling my blood boil. "I'll make them pay," I said, my voice low but resolute. Henry looked at me, a hint of pride in his eyes. "You're more like your father than you realize, Martin." Back at my apartment, I opened my notebook again. I added what I had just witnessed. Camila's panic, Anthony's mention of moving money overseas, their plan to liquidate assets. I knew I was on the right track, but I also knew I had to be cautious. Camila and Anthony weren't easy opponents. They had manipulated my father, driven him to his breaking point, and now they wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect themselves. I began reaching out to former company employees who had been loyal to my father. A few agreed to meet me, though they were afraid of getting involved. They told me that Anthony had secretly funneled large sums out of the company, disguised as fake contracts. Camila, as my father's wife, had signed off on those documents, helping Anthony cover his tracks. I wrote down everything, every detail, every name involved. I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but I also knew each step was like walking on a knife's edge. I looked out the window where the city lights still twinkled. I thought of my father, of the pain he endured, of the betrayal he couldn't overcome. I thought of my mother and Ivy, taken by that fateful fire, and of the home I once called my sanctuary. Camila and Anthony may have stolen everything, but they couldn't steal my resolve. I gripped my notebook, feeling its weight, and told myself, "Dad, I'm getting closer. I won't let you down." The next day, Henry introduced me to a team of financial investigators. They had worked for major corporations, experienced in uncovering complex fraud cases. They agreed to help me on the condition that I keep their identities confidential. We began digging into Miller Enterprises' financial records, using the documents I had secretly taken from my father's computer and those Henry still had. After weeks of relentless work, we uncovered a web of suspicious transactions. Anthony, as my father's right-hand man, had signed a series of fake contracts, funneling money from the company to offshore accounts under the guise of consulting fees and project expenses. Camila, as my father's wife, had approved many of these transactions despite having no official role in the company. But what shocked me most was a DNA report the investigators found in a hidden safe in Anthony's office. The report, conducted years earlier, confirmed that Stella and Oliver were not my father's children. I gripped the paper tightly, my heart pounding. This was the evidence I needed, not only to prove Camila's betrayal, but also to expose the lies she had constructed to seize my father's fortune. I thought of my father, of the nights he sat alone, knowing the truth, but unable to confront it. My heart ached, but at the same time, I felt a surge of new strength. My father couldn't fight, but I would do it for him. I decided not to confront them directly. Camila and Anthony still thought of me as a defeated outcast, kicked out of the house with nothing but a suitcase and a wooden box. I wanted them to keep thinking that, to bask in their false sense of victory. Instead of facing them head-on, I chose to let justice speak through channels they wouldn't expect, the media and the company's major creditors. I contacted a renowned investigative journalist, Ellen Harper, who had written incisive articles about financial scandals. I met her in a small cafe, bringing copies of the documents the investigators had gathered. I told her my father's story about Camila and Anthony's betrayal, the fraudulent transactions, and the DNA report. Ellen listened, her eyes lighting up. "This is a big story, Martin," she said. "But are you sure you want to go public? It'll shake not just Camila, but your family's reputation." I nodded, my voice firm. "I want the truth to come out. My father deserves justice." Ellen agreed, and just a few days later, the first article appeared in the Maryland Tribune. Scandal at Miller Enterprises. Frederick Miller's widow, suspected of infidelity and financial fraud. The article cited the documents detailing suspicious transactions and the illicit relationship between Camila and Anthony. It was like a bomb, sending shock waves through public opinion. The company's major creditors, already frustrated by unpaid debts, began applying even more pressure on Camila. They filed lawsuits demanding a thorough investigation into the management of Miller Enterprises' assets. Meanwhile, I stayed in the shadows, an observer. I didn't appear in the press or contact Camila or Anthony directly. I wanted them to feel the pressure closing in from all sides without knowing I was behind it. Ellen's subsequent articles grew increasingly scathing, exposing details of the fake contracts and the offshore money transfers. One article even posed the question, Camila West, heir or manipulator? I read those lines in my small apartment, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because Camila was losing everything. Sorrow because I knew what my father had endured before his death. The courts also began to act. Civil lawsuits were filed, and the Financial Investigation Agency launched an official probe into Anthony Blake. I received word from Henry that Anthony had been summoned for questioning and his offshore accounts were being frozen. Camila, once arrogant and self-assured, became the focal point of public criticism. The press no longer referred to her as the wealthy heiress, but as the woman suspected of orchestrating the collapse of the Miller empire. I imagine her sitting in the mansion, reading those articles, her face pale with panic, and for the first time, I felt a spark of satisfaction. As time passed, justice began to take shape. The court issued its final ruling. All of my father's assets, the mansion, the supercars, the company shares, the horse racing track, were liquidated to pay off debts. Camila lost everything. The house she had once kicked me out of now belonged to a major creditor. The supercars she and Anthony had flaunted were seized. The company shares, once a symbol of the Miller empire, were auctioned off to cover loans. Camila was left with nothing, stripped of the arrogance she had once worn so proudly. Anthony didn't escape justice either. The financial investigation exposed a litany of charges against him, from corruption to financial fraud. He was indicted, facing the prospect of years in prison. The press reported his downfall with undisguised glee. Frederick Miller's right-hand man, from trusted ally to betrayer. I read those lines, feeling a portion of the burden in my heart lift. But I didn't feel joy. I only felt emptiness, because justice couldn't bring my father back. Camila was utterly broken. Maryland's high society, which had once celebrated her as a wealthy widow, now turned its back on her. Her glamorous friends vanished, and she became the target of scorn. Stella and Oliver, the innocent children caught in their mother's game, were tainted by the scandal. I didn't blame them, but I couldn't help them either. I had tried to love them as siblings, but the truth about their lineage had built an insurmountable wall between us. I kept the $20 million trust fund a secret. It was an independent asset my father had left me, untouched by the company's debts. I didn't use it to save Camila or the company, as that wasn't my father's wish. He had set up the fund to give me a fresh start, and I would honor that. But I also knew the money wasn't just a gift. It was a responsibility. I had to use it to restore my family's honor and do something meaningful beyond mere revenge. The media began to shift its perspective on me. An article by Ellen Harper, published a few weeks after the assets were liquidated, bore the headline, "Martin Miller, the true heir of Frederick Miller." The piece recounted my story, a son cast out of his home, but who never gave up on his father. At my request, it didn't mention the trust fund, but it emphasized that I was the only one Frederick Miller truly trusted. Reading the article, I felt a part of my father's honor had been restored. He was no longer seen as a failed businessman in the public's eyes, but as a father who had sacrificed everything to protect his son. One morning, I returned to the cemetery where my father rested. I stood before his grave, placing a bouquet of white roses, my mother's favorite flower. I knelt, touching the cold gravestone, and whispered, "I did it, Dad. Camila and Anthony have paid the price. Your honor has been restored. You can rest now." Tears fell, but this time, they weren't tears of pain or anger. They were tears of release. I decided to use the trust fund to do something greater than just rebuilding the Miller name. I established a charitable foundation in honor of my mother and Ivy, the Grace and Ivy Miller Foundation, to support families affected by fires and provide scholarships for children who had lost loved ones. I wanted the memory of my mother and sister to live on, not just within me, but through the good I could do for the world. My father had left me not only money, but a responsibility to live a meaningful life, rising above pain and loss. I stood before the new office of the foundation, watching the sign bearing my mother's and Ivy's names gleam in the sunlight. I thought my father, my mother, Ivy, and the long journey I had traveled. Camila and Anthony had been defeated, not through blind revenge, but through justice and truth. I had done what my father wanted, protected his legacy, not just with money, but with integrity and love for my family. I stepped into the office, ready to begin a new chapter. The battle was over, but my journey wasn't. I would live, build, and make my mother, Ivy and father proud. I did it, I whispered. And this time, I knew they were smiling from afar. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight for justice when the odds were completely stacked against you? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.